Hello and welcome friends to this second session on marketing of agri-commodities. You would remember that up till now we have discussed the marketing of agri-commodities, wherein we discussed the attributes of agri-commodities, and then we moved on to the difference between marketable surplus and the marketed quantity. Now basically we are going to have a look at the markets which are available for sales of agri-commodities, or the markets where the agri-commodities are sold, and then we'll see how they are classified, what are the different bases of classification, and then we'll also have a look at the intermediaries which operate in these markets. So as far as the markets are concerned, they are basically classified on different bases. So the first basis is the frequency. Depending on whether the markets are held on a daily basis or on a weekly basis, we can classify them as a weekly market or daily market or fortnightly market or monthly markets. So this is one basis of classification. Then we have got the the second basis, which is basically according to the commodity which are primarily sold in these markets, which are primarily sold and bought in these markets. So if a commodity market is primarily known for exchange of fruits and vegetables, then accordingly they will be called the fruit market or the vegetable market. In case the predominant exchange is of food grains, then it would be called the grains market. Likewise, if it is some cash crop like cotton or maybe sugar cane or maybe jute, then accordingly we'll use the different nomenclature to designate such markets. So this is another basis of classification. Then we have got business volumes. This is again another basis of classification of agri-commodities markets. For example, as far as business volumes are concerned, there are wholesale markets and then there are retail markets. You understand already, wholesale markets, basically the business volumes would be larger, the lot size would be larger, there might be exchange of tons of quantities of commodities, and generally these kind of transactions would take place between wholesalers or wholesaler and retailer or trader and wholesaler. So these kind of transactions are taking place between such entities, and generally the volume transacted is very high. On the other hand, if you look at the retail agri-commodities markets, generally, as the name suggests, here the buyers are the customers, while the sellers could be the retailers or could be the traders. So as far as the volume transacted is concerned, per lot size is relatively very lower, much lower than the size in the wholesale market. So this is the difference between the wholesale market and the retail market. So accordingly we can use different nomenclatures to describe a wholesale market, agri-commodity market, and a retail agri-commodity market. Now we are going to talk about the other basis of classification, which is the area coverage. Depending on how much area is covered by the particular market, by the particular agri-commodity market, we can classify the market as a village or a block level market, or a district level market, or a national level or a world level market. The commodities that are generally exchanged in village or block level markets are fruits and vegetables. One reason could be because these are all perishable commodities, so naturally it does not make sense to send it to a far off district headquarter for purpose of sale. So generally these commodities are generally sold in the markets in the near vicinity, or the markets which are closer to the production areas. So they are basically called the village or the block level markets. As far as the district level markets are concerned, generally the food grains are exchanged in these markets. Then we've got national level market, where when the agri-commodities are bought by one state and sold by one state. So the exchange takes place between different states. For example, if you look at some commodities like tea or coffee, you would find that their production is localized. They are not produced throughout the country. If you look at paddy, if you look at wheat is generally grown in the northern plains, including the Bihar, Madhya Pradesh, Rajasthan, UP and parts of the adjoining states. So wheat is not grown in significant quantities in the southern part of the country. Likewise, there are specific reasons for jute production, which is these regions are basically in the eastern part of the country, somewhere near Bengal and the adjoining areas. So naturally, if a particular state requires a particular commodity which is not grown, which is not produced locally, then naturally it will trade that commodity with some other state. So these kind of exchanges take place in a national market, and generally the products which are bought and sold are products like tea, jute and coffee. Then there are word level markets, wherein exchange between two different countries belonging to two different regions takes place. For example, only recently Malaysia has ordered quite a significant amount of rice from India. So this is an example of a word level market wherein transactions are taking place between two countries. Again, depending on which country is abundant in what. So naturally India is abundant as far as rice production is concerned. We have got abundant production of rice, paddy. So naturally we are going to export these kind of products, and then we are going to import those kind of commodities which are not grown here in India. So these kind of transactions would take place in a word level market, right? Then we have got another basis of classification, which is based on the type of marketing function. Now what do we mean by marketing function? There are primary markets where only primary functions take place. So primary markets, here we are using this nomenclature to denote that only primary functions would take place here. What would these functions be? Assembling or the collection of produce. So a trader in a particular primary market would buy not from just one farmer, he would buy from a number of farmers, because he needs to have a large quantity for purpose of trade. So he is not going to buy just from one particular farmer who is growing in very little quantity, which is not sufficient for the trader. So he is going to buy from a number of farmers, and this is what basically assembling is: collecting the produce from different farmers, because one or two farmers may not be growing that much in that kind of quantity which the trader requires. So this is the primary market where you assemble or collect the produce. Then a little bit of processing also takes place, which means it could be washing, drying. So these kind of elementary processing also takes place in primary market. Not sophisticated processing, only elementary crude kind of processing. For example, I've told you that washing could be one kind of processing, and drying in the sun, this could be another kind of processing, and then packaging in big sacks. So this is another kind of primary function, processing. And then once this has been done, the product would then further be distributed, further be sold. So these are the functions of the primary markets. So they only perform primary functions. However, secondary markets form other functions, other support activities also. So secondary markets perform other functions. For example, there would be standardization and grading facilities. I have talked about standardization. You are fixing standards for the quality of agri-commodity depending on various attributes like moisture content, like the color, the weight, the pH level, the level of acidity, for example, the level of acid in the commodity. This would be the case with oranges or maybe apples, and there can be so many there can be so many such standards which are set, and on such basis we grade a particular agri-commodity, whether it belongs to the best grade or the second best or the third best or the worst grade, because different commodities, or because the same commodity, if has two different grades. Let's say we have the same commodity, but we have two different grades of commodities available, which means I have the apples, but apples are of different grades. Naturally, they would be fetching me different prices in the market because their quality is very different, right? Not all apples would be of the same time. So that is why you grade every single agri commodity that you receive, and accordingly, depending on the grades, then you pay for the commodity, or then you order the commodity. So this is what basically standardization and grading is. Standardization is setting up standards, and grading is then using these standards to grade the agri commodity so that we can accordingly fix the prices for that particular commodity. Then we have got packaging. Here more elaborate kind of packaging takes place in these secondary markets, and then transportation infrastructure is available, transportation facilities are available. Then we have got storage facilities also. We might have cold storages, we might have other kind of warehouses also, and then financing functions are also performed by secondary markets, wherein we have got banks or financial institutions which are providing credit to farmers or traders who are involved in exchanges in these markets. So this is basically the function that secondary markets perform, and that is why, depending on the marketing function that a particular market is performing, we categorize it either as a primary market or a secondary market, right? Let us talk about just one more basis of classification, and that is location, right? So basis of location, we are going to now categorize the different markets. So the first one is the village markets. Why? Because they are located in villages. So then the second one is the primary markets. Again, these are same as the primary markets we have mentioned above. The only difference is here we are categorizing them as primary markets based on location. There we were categorizing them as marketing as primary markets on the basis of marketing functions performed by them. So what are primary markets on the basis of location? Now this would be the attribute of a primary market on the basis of location. Here the farmers and the traders would be there. There would be transactions mostly between the farmers and the traders. The farmers would sell and the traders would buy. In primary markets, you would not find transactions between traders and traders. So one trader who has already bought from a farmer would not be selling to some other trader, or maybe to a wholesaler, and wholesaler would not be selling to a retailer. So these are not the kind of transactions which you would find in a primary market. Okay. Again, so as I said, the transactions would mostly be between the farmers who would be selling their produce and the traders who would be buying the produce. Then we have got assembling and distribution for local consumption. So assembling would be taking place, and you have a look at what we had discussed when we were talking about the marketing functions. There also we had discussed this assembling and distribution for local consumption. But please understand, this is a market, primary market, which has a very narrow scope. It is only meant for assembling and distribution, only for local consumption. And generally these markets are found near the production centers, near the fields, near the farms, and near the rural areas. So these kind of markets are called primary markets. Then we have got secondary markets. So what will happen if the farmer's produce has now been purchased by trader? Trader is not going to consume all of this produce. What will he be doing? He will be actually selling it to some other trader, then who would then probably sell it to some other trader, and maybe to some exporter who would then sell it to some importer in some other country. So there are so many intermediaries in between. So in secondary markets, such transactions take place between the traders and the wholesalers, traders and the other traders, and then the retailers. So these kind of transactions are taking place in secondary markets. And again, as mentioned in the discussion on marketing function also, these are the markets which have adequate transport, communication and banking facilities, and generally they are situated in the town or the district levels. So they are not situated near the production center, they are situated at a distance from the production center, at the town center or maybe at the district headquarters. So these are secondary markets. So, and if you look at the structure of these secondary markets, you'll find that the structures and the kind of buildings which they use, they are also very markedly different from the primary markets. In primary markets, there would be a thatched roof, and the transactions would be taking place under that roof, while in secondary markets there would be concrete buildings and a proper area for transaction to take place between the market players, between the participants in the market. And that is why, and also the secondary markets would be using better technology, they would be using better quality instruments. For example, the weighing machines that will be used, they will be of better quality in secondary markets. Primary markets, the weighing machine would be less expensive, but then not of that good a quality. So there would be significant differences between the primary and the secondary markets. Then we've got terminal markets. Now I hope you know what terminal means. Terminal means something which is located at the end. That is why we've got railway terminals, right? So what will happen to the what will happen in the terminal markets? Terminal markets basically are those markets where the product is sold to the end customer. So in that sense, the whole supply chain terminates in these terminal markets, and that is why they are given this designation of a terminal market. So generally selling takes place to customers. Many times traders sell to processors of agri-commodities. For example, those who are producing, let's say, apple juice from apple, or those who are producing jam, pickles, those who are producing edible oil from oil seeds. So these kind of processors are there, and generally the product may be sold to consumers or the processors or the exporters who would be purchasing the product for export to some other country. So that is why these markets are called terminal markets, and they are generally near the cities. So they are generally found near the cities. And then we've got the seaboard markets. Seaboard markets are basically near the seashore, and naturally if the market is located near the seashore, there is a purpose behind it. The purpose is that the agri-commodities would either be exported from there to some other country, or there might be an import of such agri-commodities from some other countries. So seaboard markets are basically meant for international trade between different countries, between two or more countries, and that is why they are located near the seashore. So you would find that they are near the ports and the seashore. So these kind of markets are called the seaboard markets. Now that we have understood the different bases on which we categorize the agri-commodities markets, now let us have a look at the methods of sale which are adopted in the agri-commodities markets. So the first one is the private negotiation, wherein the sale takes place between two parties on the basis of private negotiation. So the market provides them a platform to interact. One party quotes prices, the other party sees whether it is comfortable in supplying the agri-commodity in that price. If both the parties are ready and they find it a mutually beneficial transactions, they would indulge in the transaction, and there would be a trade of commodity which will take place. So these are what private negotiations. So these kind of negotiations, and these methods of sale are not specific to primary or the secondary market. So it could be between these kind of private negotiations could be between the farmer and the trader. It could be also between the two different traders in the secondary markets. However, the method is private negotiation. So both the parties interact, and then there is a round of bargaining which will take place, and based on the end result, whether it is satisfying for both the parties or not, the transaction would materialize. Then we have got open auction, wherein the seller asks the buyers to bid for his produce or to bid for the commodity. So an open auction takes place. The prospective buyers, they quote different prices, and depending on the highest prices, whosoever has quoted the highest prices, the commodity is sold to that particular entity. So this is an open auction, boli lagana. Then we have got state trading. State trading means there is involvement of state, which means there is involvement of government agencies. It could be the central government agencies like Food Corporation of India. It could be various state government agencies also. So purchase by government agencies. The central agency for this purpose is Food Corporation of India, which buys food grains, specifically wheat and paddy, rice from the farmers across the country. So this is the job which is performed by FCI. So likewise we have got some state agencies also which purchase from the farmers. And then as far as the price is concerned, it basically is based on the MSP, minimum support price, which has been declared by the government. So government, just a bit of a diversion now, let me give you a brief idea about MSP. The minimum support price is the price which is declared by the government at the beginning of the sowing season. So the government declares a particular price, which means that the government is assuring the farmer that if he is not able to sell his produce, the government would for sure purchase his produce at that particular price. So this is the minimum support price mechanism. However, many a times it is also used as a signaling device by the government. Let's say, for example, if the government wants to increase the production of, let's say, pulses, dal, and India is dependent on imports of pulses, so naturally government would want to save their foreign exchange reserves. And what would they do? So they would want to reduce the import of pulses. How can this happen? Only when you have sufficient amount of domestic production. So to make this happen, the government will quote a higher MSP so that the farmers are incentivized to produce that particular crop, in this case the pulses. So this is also used as a signaling device by the government. The government also assures the farmers and then uses it as a signaling device, and many a times the farmers switch from one crop to the other depending on the MSP declared by the government. Fine. Now we are coming back to the discussion that we are having here. So the price that is paid by these government agencies will be the one which is set up, which is declared as the minimum support price. However, according to the quality of the agri-commodity on offer, the price may vary a little within a particular band. So the MSP is there, the minimum support price is there, and then the quality of the commodity would also play a role in deciding the final price which the government would be paying. Now what do we mean by quality? I told you about quality. We were discussing this when we talked about standardization and grading. So the amount of moisture which is available, which is there in the commodity, the size, the weight, the pest infestation, whether it is infested by pest or not, or how much portion of the lot is infested by pest. So all these help the government agencies decide the final price which they would be paying to the farmers. So this is what happens in state trading, and state trading is a major initiative by the government to also, as I have said already, assure the farmers that they would not have to worry in case they are not able to sell their produce in the market, because the government would always be ready to purchase from them. And then we have got another method of sale which is called the forward sale. What do we mean by forward sale? Forward, you know what it means. The future produce is promised to be sold at a fixed price. What do we mean by this? The seeds may not yet be sown. The crop naturally has not been harvested, but then there is already a contract between the farmer and a prospective buyer that the farmer would deliver this quantity of the agro-commodity by this date to the prospective buyer, and the buyer promises that he would pay a particular price for this particular commodity. So there is some kind of a promise which is made by the farmer that he would be selling his produce in future. The produce is maybe not yet sown, or the produce is yet to be harvested, but then there is a contract which will materialize only in future. So that is why it's called a forward sale. So the future produce promised to be sold at a fixed price. Why do the farmers and the traders, or it could be companies which require agri-commodities as raw material, why do they indulge in, why do they get involved in forward sale? See, it reduces the the risk for both the entities. The risk for the farmers is reduced because now they know that if I produce according to a particular quality and quantity, this would be purchased by somebody who has promised me that he will purchase it from me. On the other hand, this other entity, which could be a trader or big companies which are dependent on which use agri-commodities as raw material, now they have an assured source of supply. So in that sense, their risk is also reduced because now they have already tied up the supplies, so they don't need to worry about who will supply me the raw material when the crop is there in the market. So that is why these kind of arrangements are made, and these kind of arrangements are called forward sale. Right now, let us have a look at the intermediaries which are there in an agri-commodity markets. So what are the intermediaries? In fact, there are a number of intermediaries in agri-commodities market, and this is one reason why many a times the farmer does not get sufficient returns for his produce, for his hard work, while on the other hand, the produce that he has sold to somebody else, to some other intermediary, to some trader, that produce then is sold to the end customer at a very high price, because there is a long list of intermediaries between the farmer or the farm gate and the customer or the customer's plate. So there are a number of intermediaries between the farm gate and the customer plate, because of which naturally all these intermediaries would want to earn their own commissions. So naturally the price of the commodity would increase by the time it reaches the end customer. And this is a big issue here in India, because though the customers have to pay a lot for basic necessity like food, for vegetables and fruits, the farmers who have produced those fruits and vegetables and agri-commodities, they are still not able to earn a lot. So this is one thing that the government is trying to work on. Now, one intermediary is the landlord. I have talked about the tenant farmers, which basically work in the fields of the landlord, and in lieu of that they either pay the landlord as in cash or in kind. In kind would mean that they part of their produce to the landlords, so and then the landlords would then further sell it to some other trader or the wholesaler. So landlords are one kind of intermediaries which are there in the agri-commodities market. Then we have got mobile traders. Mobile traders means ferry valet traders. So they keep on moving from one place to the other, and they buy from the farmers and then maybe at times from the other traders, and then they sell it to, they keep moving in the consumption centers, the towns, the district headquarters, the urban areas, and then they sell the agri-commodity there. So this is the role that these kind of intermediaries play. Then we have got the brokers or the dalal. Now please understand, brokers, the only role which is played by brokers is to bring together the buyer and the seller, and that is what they charge both the buyer and seller for. So they are not taking the ownership of the produce. They only bring the buyer and the seller on the same platform so that a transaction between the two may materialize, and then they will charge a commission from both the buyers and the sellers. So this is the job of the brokers, bring together buyers and sellers, and they charge brokerage. So I was talking about the commission. We can also use the term brokerage. So they charge brokerage from both the buyers and the sellers. So there are other kind of intermediaries. So they are not taking any ownership of the produce, which means the seller is not going to sell the produce to the broker. It's not like that. The seller would be selling to the buyer. The broker would only bring them both on the same platform so that they can negotiate and arrive at some particular decision, and then they may get involved in the transaction. Then we have got the Kacharis, Aartis. The term is Aarti. So the Kacharis, they are the ones who take ownership of the product also. What is the difference between a broker and the Kacha Artiya? Kacha Arti is not only going to he's a trader basically, but he's not going to arrange for a meeting between the buyer, which is the farmer, and this between the seller, which is the farmer, and the buyers. He's going to basically purchase the produce from the farmer, and then he's going to sell it to somebody else. It could be a trader, it could be a wholesaler. So that is the job of Kacha Aarti. However, please understand what is the difference between broker and Aarti. The difference is that Aarti would actually buy the produce from the farmer and then they sell it to some trader or some other middleman or some other intermediary. In this sense, they take the ownership of the produce. So the risk is entirely theirs if the produce doesn't get sold. So they've bought the produce from the farmer, but if they somehow not able to sell it to the other trader or maybe a wholesaler, then the risk is entirely theirs. On the other hand, this is not the case with the brokers. Brokers, they actually have to run, they are not running any risk because they are simply not buying anything from the farmer. They are only arranging a meeting between the farmer and the prospective buyer, and then they are charging brokerage for that. So that is the difference between a Kacha Aarti and a broker. Since the Kacha Aartis are taking much more risk, naturally what will happen is that the farmer will have to settle for a lower price while selling to Aartis, Kacha Aartis. Then we have got the Pakka Aartis. Now what is the difference between a Kacha Aarti and Pakka Aarti? The difference between Aarti and brokers, you know now. The difference between Kacha Aarti and Pakka Aarti is, while the Kacha Aarti is only there to buy the produce from the farmer and in that sense take the ownership of the produce and then sell it to somebody else, the Pakka Aarti is also playing a role of a consultant. So he's playing the role of a consultant. He might extend some loan facility to the farmer. He may be charging farmer very high interest rates for that. However, he may still provide some loan to the farmers when the farmers needs it. Then the Pakhartis at times they also provide advisory services to the farmers so that the farmers may understand what all inputs to be used, what time of the year the seeds should be sown. So these kind of inputs, these kind of consultancy services are also provided by Pakka Aartis, and that is the difference between a Pakka Aarti and a Kacha Aarti. So Pakka Aarti is providing many more services to the farmers. So these are again Kacha Aartis and Pakka Aartis and brokers. They are all intermediaries. And one more thing which has happened, and this has now been understood, that these intermediaries basically, since they are in a dominant position, they exploit the farmers a lot. So there was a thinking that why can't the farmers have an organization, have some kind of an entity of their own to sell their produce in the market, and then whatever profits are earned in this process, they can be distributed among the farmers rather than intermediary profiting at the cost of the farmers. The farmers should be able to enjoy the produce of their hard work, and that is why we have got farmer cooperatives. We have discussed about farmer cooperatives and we'll be discussing about them in the next unit also. So farmer cooperatives do what? They club up the produce of all the farmers and then they sell it as one lot in the market. So this way the farmers are able to bargain for a better price. Apart from that, many times farmer cooperatives also do what? They also buy in bulk the various agri inputs that the farmers require, including the seeds and the pesticides and at times the agri machinery, and then they distribute. Naturally, since they would be buying in bulk because they've clubbed up the requirements of all the farmers, they would be able to get a discount, so the cost saving would be passed on to the farmers. So many a times this is one more activity that these farmer cooperatives indulge in, and by far the farmer cooperatives are the best option for a farmer because these farmer cooperatives, naturally, they are meant for the benefit of the farmers. They are not going to exploit the farmers, because ultimately the farmers have come together to form these cooperatives, and the farmers would be able to benefit more from the sale of their produce in the market. Fine. So this concludes our discussion on marketing of agri-commodities, and now we would be moving on to the next unit in the forthcoming sessions. I know very well that many of you are not actually going through these video sessions very sincerely and religiously, so I'll make sure that if you read the bullet points only, you would not be able to answer any of the questions in the test. However, if you are listening to the whole lecture and then making your own notes, you would be able to score 10 out of 10 also. Thank you.